Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in this time zone. Um, Welcome IES Abroad alumni, staff, and friends. My name is Dawn DeBoard, and I am the Associate Director of Advancement and Alumni Engagement here at IES Abroad. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our Alumni Ambassador Series conversation with Ambassador Adrienne O'Neal, IES Madrid, 1974 and 75. First off, I want to welcome Brittney Johnson, who is an anchor and reporter at NBC5 in Dallas-Fort Worth and a graduate of Howard University and UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, who is an IES Granada alum from the spring of 2006. Welcome, Brittney.
Hello, Dawn, and hello to all of the other participants of the webinar. Hope we've got some other IES alum in the audience as well. It's great to be here today, and it's just wonderful to have the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and to welcome Ambassador Adrienne O'Neal here from Madrid, 74-75. You took advantage of doing a full year of the IES program back when you were a student at Spelman, and then went on to have a 30-year career in service with the State Department as an ambassador. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Ambassador O'Neal, thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Brittney. It's really a pleasure to be here with you.
Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to take you back to your time at Spelman. Can you share with us what led you to study abroad?
Well, as I was thinking about this after we had our previous conversation, and the time at which I did my study abroad was radically different from the times in which we live now. There was no internet. There were no cell phones. There was no social media. There was no streaming, and TV was pre-cable.
Wow.
So it was a completely different time, different scenario. I had been studying Spanish since high school. I had studied Spanish 4 years in high school and continued to study at Spelman. And it occurred to me that the only way I was really going to be able to learn the language would be to go to a country where Spanish was spoken. And so I went to my advisor and I asked, and she immediately pulled up the IES Abroad. And so there was obviously a connection between IES and Spelman. And that year, I guess I was the only one who asked. And so it was very easy for me to hop on that train.
You talk about times being so different between the internet and streaming. What was the conversation like at that time around study abroad? Did you have other classmates who were talking about it? Was it very common, or did you find that you were kind of stepping out alone?
I was clearly stepping out alone. No one that I knew when I was at Spelman did a study abroad. I'm sure there must have been others, but I'm the only one I know about. And I think also that's why it was so easy for me to get the opportunity, because it wasn't a popular thing to do.
Wasn't popular to do, but you stood out. You had the courage to go ahead and do it. You mentioned a little bit about your family, kind of wanting to help prepare you for that. Can you talk about some of the things that they did to try to help you prepare? Because I thought that was really neat.
Well, they found a study abroad program that was based in Spain and arranged for a young Spanish woman to come and live with us for a couple of weeks in the summer. And so this was going on pretty well until after 2 or 3 days, the young woman said that she would rather not be in a home of African Americans, that her father had left her mother for an African woman, and she would prefer just not to be with Black people. And so my parents, they tried to split a gasket with us. They said, you see, you're asking to do these things that are only going to cause trouble. And when I insisted, I said, look, that's just one person. She's from Toledo. She's not from Madrid. This is not, a normal reaction. But they were very wary after that.
But you persisted and you insisted and you went on to study. Can you share more about more with us about your time in Madrid? And if you had any aha moments while you were there about how this might lead to meaningful experiences in your life, or how your study abroad experience might influence the rest of your life?
Brittney, I can't say to you that there was one aha moment, but there was like a steady stream of aha moments. I had never been out of the states of Louisiana, Alabama, and Georgia. So just being in my IES group, where there was this wonderful delegation from California, to me, they were like foreign. You know, I had never known anyone from California before. So just starting there, getting a little bit into the diversity of the United States. And then, of course, being in Madrid, the feeling, the sensation of living with your history every day was very appealing to me. I had not experienced that in the US. And then the idea that there were so many different factions going on. For example, at that time, there were still very large military bases in Spain. The one close to Madrid was Torrejón. And so we could go there and visit, and we could see how, you know, military installations were something that I had never, ever had any interest in or dreamed about, but, you know, there they were. And then this was also the 70s. So it was disco era. And so all of these discos were all over town with American music, which was really interesting. Through my group, I got a chance to do some travel and to see how, you know, even though Spain was a much smaller country than my own, how it also had different customs and different places, different foods. And I'd have to say, Brittney, at that time, I didn't have any broad vision. But in retrospect, I can say that I would never have had the courage or the self-assurance to embark upon a diplomatic career had I not done my study abroad with IES.
I think that's one way that, you know, I can certainly relate to you, is that it was my first time out of the country as well. My family was also very worried. As a matter of fact, we didn't tell my grandmother until when I was close to coming home. And I would send her a couple of postcards toward the very, very end, but we knew that if she knew before I went that I might not be able to go. And so it was important to kind of let her know that I was safe, then having a wonderful time. And, you know, you mentioned that courage, and you're absolutely right, to move across the country alone as a journalist. I would often look back to that time when I went to Spain all by myself, and my Spanish was not good. So I knew I gained a couple of survival skills doing that. Let's shift. Let's talk about your language skills. I mean, you were able to focus on your Spanish there, but then you picked up Portuguese. How did you decide to pick up Portuguese, and what was it like picking up that second language, and then your third language going on to benefit your work at the State Department?
Well, I ended up in a graduate school program in Spanish language and literature. And when I got to the University of Minnesota, after I had finished a master's degree at Middlebury College, I went to the University of Minnesota, and the department at Minnesota was called the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. So anyone who did Spanish had to also take classes in Portuguese, and anyone who came in Portuguese had to also take classes in Spanish. And this was actually a brilliant strategy, mirroring, of course, the geography, you know, Spain and Portugal close to each other. But of course, and we have, you know, Portuguese-speaking countries in the Americas. So learning Portuguese, I learned Portuguese primarily by having a Brazilian neighbor who spoke to me a lot in Portuguese. And then, of course, I dove into the Portuguese literature from that. So Portuguese came very easily and naturally, very organically. Later, after I joined the State Department, and then I was trained in Italian, that's where sort of the trouble hit. It's like my Spanish and my Portuguese were perfectly separated and intact. But when I put Italian into the mix, everything just went haywire. Even French words would come out, this I had taken courses in French in school. So there was somewhat of a mixing there, but I was able to overcome it. And I have to admit, I don't speak these languages simultaneously. If I go now since I've been to so many Portuguese speaking countries, that Portuguese is the dominant language for me now. But if I go to a Spanish speaking country like Mexico or wherever, it takes me 2 or 3 days to hone down the language to be pure Spanish and not Portañol or, something like that.
That's fascinating. You talk about, so Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, when you started your work with the State Department. Let's dive into that. How did you end up going into your work at the State Department, beginning your career as a diplomat?
Well, that was sort of a desperation move because after being so many years in the university, as I got closer to the finish of my studies, I realized that university life was not for me. That I didn't want to be, especially as a student of literature, I did not want to be in the stacks of the library, reading and studying most of my time. I wanted to be out and about. I wanted to get to know people. I wanted to have more human contact. So I went to the Career Center at the University of Minnesota, and the State Department had been there just the day before. And they left all of this information and instructions and so forth. And it actually took me 2 years to be integrated into the State Department.
2 years to go ahead and get integrated. What were some of the lessons that you learned while you were studying abroad about maybe the world or just about yourself that you found useful?
Well, I guess the biggest surprise was that there was a lot of interest in me. In the 70s, the US was considered the primary sort of superpower of the Western world vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. It was in the epocha of the Cold War. And so there was a lot of interest and a lot of positive, I have to say, because later on, as I worked in the State Department, that changed completely, a whole 180. But at that time, it was a very positive thing to be an American, and people were very interested in getting to know, what an American was like. And certainly for many people in Spain, I was the first African American they had ever seen. At that time, without all of the social media and the advanced communication that we enjoy today, the African American experience was not very well known abroad.
So how did it feel to be that example for people, to be the one African-American that someone ever met? I mean, I've been in that position before when I studied abroad, and I remember just not really knowing what to do with it, honestly, being told, gosh, can she touch your hand? You're the first Black person she's ever seen. It took me back a little bit. Of course, overall it went well, but I just remember at the time as a student in particular being a little bit shocked by that.
Well, at the time of my study abroad, I was sort of torn between all the things that were different and all of the freedoms and all of the opportunities that were present at that time in my country. I was torn between that story and then the story of civil rights, which I had lived, very ardently, throughout my childhood in Birmingham. And so I, sort of gave a combination of these stories. But I have to say that once you go abroad, I don't know if this happened to you, the sort of knowledge that you are American through and through 100% is very strong. Like, you know that all of your context is the American context, you know, for better or for worse. And it's a wonderful one, you know, still is, but back then it was even more.
Sure. No, I think I can certainly relate to that feeling of recognizing how much of who we are and what we believe and what we know is shaped by where we're born and where we're raised. And that certainly influences even more so now how I receive other people and receive their stories and what they're enduring and how and their perspectives, because you recognize that how we're shaped. And so you kind of give them that same sort of grace and credit, knowing that we have a lot to learn about their context as well.
That's a very good point, because even as there was a lot of interest in me, I also was very eager to learn about the Spanish and their ways. You know, this was during the Franco dictatorship. And so I saw semi-automatic weapons for the first time, you know, police on the street with big guns. That was, you know, something completely out of my context. And also just the idea that we had so many choices, that many of the Spanish friends I had knew exactly who they were going to be from the family in which they were born. And this wasn't something that I had experienced in the US, though I have learned now that that exists. But just to realize the context of freedom of profession and freedom of action and freedom of being was very striking.
I agree. I mean, it is. It's really different. I know for me, it was. I had this obsession with grades and achieving and having an A just to have an A, right? I mean, that was so important to me. And my professors in Spain sort of said, "You just need to focus on learning." It's okay. You just need to actually understand the material and enjoy your experience with the material and not be so obsessed with your GPA. But as an American, that was certainly at that time in particular, very, very significant and something that a lot of us focus on. And it was another example of just how we were different and something that I tried to hold on to. Can't say that I've always done a good job with that. You know, you mentioned about how we're able to sort of learn more about ourselves through what we're learning about one another. When you think about today and some of the current challenges that we have with nationalism in different countries all over, some of the challenges that we have based on your experience studying abroad and based on your experience serving abroad, what are your thoughts on how we might be able to steer that in a more positive direction?
Well, Brittney, the key to all of this that, you know, even then and now, and I guess forevermore, is we need to listen to each other's stories. We need to listen to points of views that are not like ours. And we need to be able to be at home with that, you know, to understand that there's somebody who's going to disagree with you vehemently on a certain topic, and that's okay. You know, not always try to be right. That's another thing we have as Americans, not try to be right, not try to have the answer, but to realize, oh, there's not just this one current. There are all of these different currents coming together. And that, Brittney, I think is very true here in our own country today. And something that we can benefit from, having had that experience. Perhaps maybe if more Americans could go abroad and understand that, we might be in a little better shape.
That would be nice, certainly, to feel like people are actually trying to listen to one another in a way that will allow them to learn about, you know, one another and where we're coming from. And I wonder too, I mean, we did this when we were in college, right? We did this during sort of such formative years that made a big influence, made a big impact on us and in the way that we proceeded in our desire to be open and to learn about one another. I advocate for study abroad all the time. Do you find that young people around you and your family and your friends and family circles, that they kind of look to you as an example and have followed in your footsteps? Have you found that to be a way that you've been able to influence young people?
Not so much in my family, but I have been able to talk to college students when they're trying to decide what they want to do, or where they want to go. I suggest to them just first that they learn another language. And then that's a way to open it up into, well, how do you learn a language if you don't go, to the place where that language is spoken?
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of learning languages here in the United States. And it just so happens that Spanish is one of the strongest languages here in the United States. And I agree with former President Obama when he said that every American should learn Spanish. And I don't know if you remember that. His campaign quickly pulled that comment because it brought so much uproar from people in the United States. But I think that I have been instrumental in encouraging people to learn languages, though nowadays, most college students do. Brittney, I was thinking about this, and you weren't even born when I did my study abroad. So we're talking about a sea change of society and culture. And that's why I'm just so honored to see here and to be here with you.
Awesome.
Because
Likewise.
things have really come a long way. And I don't think there was a Brittney Johnson at the time that I went to study in Spain on the TV.
Sure. And it's funny that you say that, because even in this market, in my role today, I am the first Black woman in my seat as a permanent main anchor for the 10 o'clock news at my station. And so you still have, and I have a friend who just started across the street. She's similar. So you still have sort of these shifts. And so you're right, when we share with people about our paths, about how we got to this point. And for me in particular, study abroad is a big part of that. Again, that courage, that desire to just have interest and curiosity in learning about the world and learning about other people. That's been a critical part of my journey as a journalist. And it's nice to be able to help connect those dots for people. Let's do this, because I'm not the only one with questions for you. We want to go ahead and bring in Ashley Simmons. She's brand coordinator with IES. And she also studied in Spain back in 2016. So she came a little bit after us. Hey there, Ashley. We know you're going to be kind of facilitating the Q&A for us. So come on in.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for being here. It's been so nice to just listen to the conversation so far, especially as Black women, and having that be a unique part of our experience and just how we continue to globalize our world. So we do have one question in the Q&A, and I was brainstorming questions too, just listening to your conversation. So the question that we have here is, let's see. Says, of course, working at the State Department as a diplomat sounds very appealing to an audience like ours. However, I understand that it's a highly competitive career path and one that requires great personal sacrifice to be stationed abroad for many years. I would be interested in Ambassador O'Neal's perspective on other ways we might be able to use Spanish language skills and our cultural competency skills acquired from our experiences abroad for meaningful careers stateside.
That's a very good question. And I'm happy that this question is coming to me now, because nowadays you have all kinds of American interests abroad. You have business interests, you have cultural interests, you have scientific interests, and all of these things offer at some point or another, in some way, the opportunity to live abroad and participate. So there would have to be, if you have a special interest, look up that interest in a country where you might want to visit, and you might find that there are opportunities. There might even be opportunities by foreign companies. I'm less familiar with that, but I do know that American companies frequently have Americans working abroad, and that would sort of alleviate the whole idea of having to compete and having to be there for a certain length of time, and all of the things that make the Foreign Service a little tedious for some people.
I would actually like to add to that. I work at an NBC station that also has a Telemundo station right in the same building. And so being bilingual, having Spanish speakers who work right alongside us has encouraged several of my colleagues to go ahead and learn how to report in Spanish as well. And one thing that I think of when I think about how to use your language skills, also thinking about geographically where you're going to be. If you have an interest and then you think about how to use your language skills in that arena, in that industry, there may be a way for you to do that in education, for example. I think about counseling positions, all kinds of coordinating positions here in Texas in particular, because we have lots of Spanish speakers. And so almost anything that you're interested in, you might be able to find a way to sort of carve out a role where they're going to see how important it is to have someone who speaks Spanish. So sometimes it's not just a job where you're using those skills every day, but knowing that you have the ability to communicate with more people in a place that has a lot of Spanish speakers can make a big difference. And then of course in news, because we certainly have many reasons to want to communicate with everyone, especially in places like Texas and California. You'll have a lot of roles that prefer that people be bilingual.
Right. And then something I didn't mention is teaching English. I know scores of people who just went abroad and found opportunities in educational institutions, as you mentioned, Brittney, to teach English. So that's a big one, also big opportunity.
Thank you for answering that question. There's a few more now. Let's see where we want to start. What were some remarkable memories or your favorite that you experienced abroad in Madrid that you still reflect on today?
Well, when I met Brittney and Ashley, and I realized that they were studying in Granada, I was like really floored, because one of the most alluring things that I saw while I was studying in Spain was Grenada. You go there, you stand there, and you see all of the Arab structures. It's like living history before your eyes. And then my mother, who was an avid reader, had pointed me to Tales of the Alhambra by Washington Irving, which is all about, this is a book that was written in the 19th century. So it's all about the history and the customs of the interface between the Arab and Catholic states, which nowadays, the understanding of that is really important. It gives you a really important vision into our contemporary world and why things are going the way they are. But there in Spain, you have it right before you, for you to see. And so I think that that's probably the most alluring place now, I would say, to go and study in Spain, though Madrid, of course, is my heart.
Next question is to please talk about the feeling and thoughts that you had when you experienced what it was like to live in a country ruled by a fascist but frail Franco regime.
Well, I went from a perspective of being very naive. Like, none of my orientation sessions said, you are going to a country that's under a dictatorship. It was all about, well, you're going to study this and you're going to live here and these are the customs and blah, blah, blah. But that aspect was not, I was not fully aware of that when I went. But of course, once I was there, as I said, the fear of people, there was fear of breaking the law. There was fear of even doing anything untoward on the street. I never saw any kind of police brutality, but just having policemen with the guns everywhere, that was a different feeling. But there wasn't, I didn't feel, because I guess I wasn't Spanish and I had not, had parents and grandparents in the Civil War, I didn't feel it as strongly as I think the locals did. I think I was still the naive American, the wide-eyed American, while I was in Madrid.
Thank you. The next one is, as a current Black woman who has had a career abroad in higher education in several countries, what advice do you have for IES Abroad students to transition their experience into a career?
Oh, this is something, just like we were addressing in the last question. When I went to Madrid, there wasn't a lot of travel and work and exchange and so forth. But nowadays, every young person I meet has been to some other country. And so I think I think it was Brittney who said, if whatever your interest is, see where that interest is in the country that you're interested in going. And this was true even for people in the Foreign Service who had spouses, maybe spouses who weren't working. One gentleman I remember was a photographer, and he immediately got a job in an Italian newspaper. So if you have a skill with the globalized world we're living in, there's got to be a counterpart for you in almost any country. And I think that's how you can approach it, to come with something you already have, to come with something to offer with that different perspective that you naturally have because you're from another country. So I would say, do it by skill set. And then if you don't feel you have something there, then education is good. But there's so many ways now. There are hobbies. There are places, where you can see birds that you can't see anywhere else, And there are all kinds of activities. Now, we're watching animals in the zoo, in China, it's a globalized world. So if you look for something, I think you might have, with an open mind and using all of the tools that are available to you today, I think you might be able to do something.
I think I'm going to segue just for a quick second, because I know Brittney mentioned earlier being obsessed with grades and obsessed with kind of trying to, that's a part of the experience. Like, we're taught, especially being, Black women, that we have to be like at the top of the top. We have to go ahead and work twice as hard or 10 times as hard. And so then you go abroad and you have grades and you want to be your best and do your best. But I love that you just mentioned, Ambassador O'Neal, you just mentioned being able to see different birds and being able to see different things that you couldn't see in other places. And it's interesting to see how study abroad also helps you see different parts of yourself that you couldn't see in other places. And you have that very unique experience of, what is this version of me here? But I actually have a question, and then I'll jump back to the next question that popped in the Q&A just now. We've been speaking a lot about learning different languages and navigating different languages. And it's one thing to know the language in the back of your head, or to know it from taking it in school and being in class, but it's another thing when you go to that country and you actually start to speak it and to try to find and develop that confidence of having the fluency on your tongue. I'm wondering what helped you become fluent in the language of yourself? Because I think that that's also something that you had to maybe learn, is to speak confidently as yourself. And maybe my question is for both of you.
Well, for me, when I got to Spain after studying Spanish so long, I was at about 50%. The Spanish was so fast that I couldn't hear it. And so I would sit in class and I would, catch here and there. And then after a couple of months, one day I noticed that I understood everything, that my listening was fluent. Speaking was a lot harder. To speak as myself, I had to make friends. And it wasn't that easy, but I was very close to one other woman in the program. And so she and I kind of together found people who would talk to us. But it's like, having a girlfriend and talking about all of the things that you would talk about. Books that you've read, parties you've gone to, music. Find someone with whom you can speak about things that are important to you. And then I think the you comes out. And I really like the way you coined that. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to put that. How do you speak you in the foreign language. I love that. And that's a very sort of wise distinction of just being able to speak, because you can go and be able to get around and whatnot, but to speak from your heart, that's another difficult.
Wow, I think I'm still learning how to be sort of confident in the language of me, if you will. I think that studying abroad really forced me just out on my own in ways that I could not anticipate what that would feel like. And then I couldn't go anywhere because I'd signed up for 4 months away from home. And I remember, I think I told the story to Ambassador O'Neal before, that when I arrived a day or so late because, and I also had the flu. And so I was sick, I couldn't speak. I just literally didn't have a voice. I had another student his Spanish was very good. And he took me to the doctor, and the taxi driver who dropped me off at my host mother said her Spanish is bad. That's all I understood, is that he told her that my Spanish was not very good. So I was just sort of out there. And I felt I was the only Black girl in my program, and I didn't come with any fellow Howard students. All the other students were lovely and I made friends, but I came from an HBCU. And now I'm in Spain and there's no one who looks like me. And my host mother is saying she has friends who's never seen anyone who looked like me. So it was just a new experience of being thrust into discomfort, but learning that I could survive. And that was so rewarding. And I think that it shifted my mindset from sort of having so much value in just accomplishments, and learning to value the journey, learning to value experience, whether it's good, bad, uncomfortable. There's just something really special about being in a new place and getting an opportunity to learn from new people and to just sit in that and to see how it feels and to take that with you. So I've had the great fortune now as a journalist and as someone who's had to move across the country and to live in cities big and small, and to have to start fresh and to learn the language of a new community all over again, and to learn how to communicate with people in Monroe, Louisiana, in Little Rock, Arkansas, North Carolina. I mean, all these places are different and they've got different culture and texture and expectations, and to have the courage to start over, and to have the confidence in knowing that I'm going to be okay and I'm going to learn something and I'm going to be able to contribute. I think I gained a lot of that by studying abroad.
Thank you for sharing. I also arrived to Granada a day late, and was just like, I feel like everybody's looking at me, like the attention's on me now because I'm the only one and everyone else is already connected. And it was a bit intimidating, but my main thing that I was frustrated with was I was figuring out how to speak Spanish, but I didn't know how to communicate who Ashley was in Spanish. Like, how do I get my quirks and my personality into this language? How do I bring that here? But even further, for students who are considering studying abroad or who are just recently coming back from studying abroad, they're now entering this space of young adulthood and thinking about how do they navigate the language of life. So I wanted to ask that question as they're also navigating the language of themselves, to reassign that value, not only from the higher grade or from the sense of accomplishment, the reward, but from the day-to-day practice. That's where the value might be reattributed in the day-to-day practice, the same way we practice daily a language. So thank you for answering that question. I will shift to the next one in the Q&A, which is from Michael Adamumi. He says, thank you so much, Ambassador O'Neal, for your very enriching perspectives. As an American who studied abroad in the 70s, and certainly as ambassador, many local people looked up to you for many things, democracy, technology, etc. Were there moments when you felt that we as Americans could learn from these folks or systems or cultures?
Oh, absolutely. There's always so much to learn from a different perspective, even if you're not learning to adapt to this perspective, but just knowing that there exists this point of view really helps you to negotiate yourself and whatever profession you have through life. Now, it happened when I was in Brazil that computers were just beginning to be used in the schools. And so we were able to take computers to the favelas And there was no Wi-Fi at the time, but there was, you know, the whatever it's called where you use the cord. And so we were able to allow young students to work on computers just as they were doing in the United States. And that was really a very rewarding thing to me, because children are such sponges. You know, they're so much better at adapting and accepting and discovering than we are. And that was one instance in which I felt that the US really played a key role in education in Brazil. Now, sadly, that initiative didn't last very long, but just seeing it, just seeing the kids embrace the technology and knowing, you know, what a hard time I was having, because, you know, I was already an adult when technology took over. And it was, you know, it was a challenge. And just to see how the children took to it much faster than the adults sort of gave me sort of a bird's eye into the future, and helped me to knock down all of my prejudices toward technology, because here we are.
Thank you. So the next question I'm actually going to pick is from Dr. Brittney Smith, and she is our new Associate Vice President, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism. So the question is, for everyone on the panel, how did you overcome the challenge of being the only or one of the few people who looked like you during your study abroad experience? Do you have any coping tips?
Again, I think my time was very, very different from either of yours. I was the only. And there was a fellow from Morehouse who was also in my group. And I think you just sort of, as we do here in American society, there's society at large, and then there's your community and your family. So you have all of these different facets of yourself, you know, all of these different interfaces that you use for the situations that arise. And, you know, that really harkens back to what we were speaking of before, you know, how do you do you? Well, you are different in different circumstances. And I don't think that has changed, though I do think perhaps we're better known now. I don't think that if I went to a workplace today, people would want to touch my hair, for example. I think that's gone. But I think it's still pretty much you have to have a version of yourself to fit into any situation.
I think similarly, you know, finding ways that you relate outside of race. I mean, race is certainly a sort of primary identifier here, right? But when you go abroad, it's being American is the thing that people sort of see. I remember it's like, some people would stare at me. They didn't really know what to do with me. And one guy said, "Oh, I knew you were American because I saw your Apple laptop." There were these moments where people weren't sure whether I was African or whether I was American, and that meant something different in Granada at that time. And so just being aware of how I was treated, but when it came to getting along with my classmates and the people around me, I mean, there were those of us who didn't party all night. We became our own little crew, you know, those of us who were not going to stay out till 5 a.m. And found ways to relate, or who had similar interests in it. So it was another sort of part of that journey of finding ways to relate and connect outside of it, but also sort of communicating about some of the unique challenges. Like I had my hair in braids when I was there, and I had to find a braider. And that took me months. I finally found a guy halfway through who could sort of touch me up, but it was very expensive and it took him a really long time. And then I also ended up connecting with students from other programs that were there, other study abroad programs. And I found a little community of Nigerians who had a restaurant. And so it was, because I think there was somewhat of a universal nod, if you will, even amongst like Black people from different countries. And so people would kind of come together and connect. So it was a really unique experience. And I think in terms of coping, I just focused on, I think, all that I was learning. And I think you certainly had days where I wasn't sure what I was encountering in the community. And those days were tough. I remember going skiing and I was the only Black person around who wasn't trying to sell something, like who wasn't sort of a street vendor. There were days when I would really kind of struggle with that a lot of the Black people that I saw were like really poor. And were either selling something or there was a time when someone thought I was a prostitute once. It was a challenge to struggle to thinking about that. To think about that was very difficult sometimes.
I get to answer this question too. Thank you. I think that this, again, because we've all been abroad during different times, it's really interesting to see how different but similar it was. Like for me, there were definitely very ostracizing moments, and there was like hands in my hair in the club, and I was like, what is going on and why is this happening? I don't like this. And there were also times where I never saw like my skin tone reflected in the foundation in even the stores around me. There were times where I was made to be exotic. There's so many different things that I experienced. I was Michelle Obama when I was abroad. Like that's what my name was from people that saw me. So that was just a very interesting thing. But what I think was like abundant and eye-opening and welcoming was being abroad and then trying to figure out what it meant to be a Black woman. I knew the stories of what this country told me. I knew the stories of what America told me, but what does it mean when I go out and I see that there's the ability to recreate myself and to create a new story? So I learned to, like you said before, Ambassador O'Neal, going abroad kind of reinforces the fact that you are really and truly an American. And I realized I too have culture. And so what is my culture? And so I was thinking like my culture is soul food. It's jazz. It's so many different things that maybe it's not the culture that's in Spain with flamenco, but it's definitely Miles Davis and it's definitely the Temptations and Motown. And I was appreciating my culture so much more. And I think that helped me cope, to know that I too had something I could share with other people. So this question was really nice. Thank you so much for asking, Brittney. And I have time for one more question before I have to pass to Jody. In what ways were you able to bring parts of your identity with you when you went abroad?
Parts of my identity. Well, I had grown up in Alabama and Louisiana. So one day I was with my group and we met a family from Georgia. And so we stopped and, talked. It was some tourist visit we were doing. And so when the conversation was over, the others said to me in total sincerity, we didn't understand a word they said. And I was so offended. I was like, come on. I mean, it was just a Southern accent. I mean, I understand accents that aren't from the South, but they said, no, we couldn't talk to them because we didn't understand them. And, I really was annoyed and, a little upset by that until fast forward, some 10 years later, when I went to rural Minnesota and someone was speaking to me and I didn't understand. And I said, oh my God, those guys were sincere. I thought they were just being snobbish. So just being Southern was kind of an anomaly because Southern people, I guess at that time, just like all Americans, didn't get out as much. We couldn't all be from California, So I think that the fact that I had a Southern upbringing, the fact that I had a Baptist upbringing, like I had never heard a Latin Mass before. I went to Spain. And so I think there are a lot of cultural things that I brought with me that, I they were just me, and they interfaced with me with the cultural things that I learned there.
Thank you for your answering the questions, and thank you for everyone who put a question in the Q&A. I'm going to pass it to Jody now, just in the intro.
Thank you, Jody. It's really an honor for me to be spotlighted like this after so many years. But seeing Brittney and Ashley, it's like, well, we're all kind of the same still as time goes by. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome to learn and to hear your stories as well.